was a sight for my soul.
All right, good evening, everybody. Gosh, quiet, subdued. We want you to get engaged tonight. I want to welcome you, first of all, and thank you for joining us, whether you're in the room. For those of you who are Zooming with us, we have a pretty full room, socially distanced, but we're glad to have all of you in the room. We're glad to have a lot of you on Zoom. A number of our alumni, I know, are joining us on Zoom, and we may have some alums in the room. Raise your hand. Thank you for coming. We appreciate that. We're going to have our start some great conversations tonight, and I really want to thank our BLSA leadership and our SBA leadership for undertaking this effort, starting tonight, but definitely not ending tonight. With race and the issues in racial injustice that have bubbled to the forefront in the country this year, like any problem, if you don't talk about it, we can't really make progress in this country. I was on the phone not more than an hour ago with the Chamber of Commerce director here in Macon, and she's getting ready for a big, tough meeting with her leadership of the Chamber of Commerce to talk about problems that exist in Macon and Bibb County and things that she sees that have prevented growth and economic development in Macon. And she says it's going to be a hard conversation that a lot of people don't want to talk about because it's uncomfortable. And that's sort of where we are on the same front with a lot of race and racial injustice issues. These can be hard discussions that are easier sometimes to not talk about. But we want to have a good discussion led by some great leaders tonight. But we want you all to be engaged. We want to hear from you. We can't go further in making progress in this law school, in this community, or in our country if we don't have your voice heard, if we don't have your leadership as lawyers who are going to be trained to guide and lead some of the progress that we can make in this country. So I am just delighted that you would be here to be a part of this conversation and to be a part of the series of programs that we hope we can host during the year. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back over to Sid. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. So my name is Sid Mathis, and I'm the Social Action Chair of BLSA's, of Mercer Law's Black Law Student Association. So just to give some context, this event spawned from a conversation I had last school semester, with a classmate and friend, Will Dasher. So we had a conversation, and to my surprise, he expressed that some of his peers were coming to him concerned about how the Black kids were all sitting together and always at the front of the class. So originally, I couldn't wrap my head around why this was a topic of conversation amongst my classmates, and I wasn't sure where I could go from there. To be honest, me and my friends were just trying to handle law school the best way we knew how. So at the time, BLSA did not have executive board elections yet. I had no intention, nor did I run for social action chair. I was just in the right place at the right time and had the right conversation with someone who cared about something that he saw happening in his school. So once I brought this to my friends and now fellow BLSA executive board members, we knew that it was something we wanted to address. So once Dean Gehrig-Moore caught wind of this, she knew that she wanted to further the discussion, and she too wanted to take an initiative to start a dialogue, and then planning began. So months of preparation later, and with the help of a great number of people, all of whom I'm very thankful for, this event has come to light. I would like to give a special thanks to Dean Cox for providing the book for all of Mercer Law, which is the topic of conversation for tonight's event. So before we get started, I would like to address the 100 or so people who are on Zoom. When we get to the Q&A portion of the town hall, there will be some functions that you can use to submit comments and questions. You can either raise your hand or you can submit comments and questions to the Q&A feature. We'll try our best to get to everyone and get as many possible questions as many questions as possible into the discussion. We'll be going back and forth between questions from the live audience as well as the Zoom people. To reiterate, when you are enabled to speak via Zoom, if you have your camera on, then your camera will pop up on the screen. So if you would not like to be shown, I would advise you to keep your camera off. And for the in-person people, I'll be walking around with a mic, which will be sanitized in between each person so that everyone via Zoom will be able to hear you. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator and the Director of Diversity and Inclusion here at Mercer, Dr. Ansley Booker.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I was like, I have an active audience, so I need y'all to like, she might be thinking like, oh, there's no one there besides Dr. Booker. So let me engage with you all tonight. And I'm so glad that you're here. I think this is a very important conversation. Like, want to reiterate the words of Dean Cox tonight in saying that this is great that you all want to start having these crucial conversations. Sometimes these conversations do make us uncomfortable, but again, in order for us to impact change, in order for us to lead change, to be those visionaries that will take our country to the next level, we have to have these conversations. We have to start at a level of awareness, so eventually we can move from fear and we can move to learning and then potentially grow. So I do believe all of us in here are thought leaders, right? Visionaries, future attorneys, alumni, right? So I'm encouraging you to graduate. That's what we're doing. I encourage you to graduate. Because again, that's part of my job. I encourage you to graduate. But again, so while we're waiting on Attorney Rye, what I wanted to do is just kind of, for a few moments, just kind of get some commentary about the book. What were your thoughts? Don't be shy. Yes, thank you.
I personally thought it was very eye-opening. There were a lot of things that I just never knew happened. That, you know, it's just weird to read about things, seeing like things happen in the news, and you think like you think that you wouldn't ever see anything like that happen in the last few years, and it's just heartbreaking. And then come to realize things like that have been happening, and some things even worse, for years and years and years, and discrete things that you never even would have thought to look for or to be aware of. It just opened my eyes a lot to things, like I said, that I never would have even thought to look for in the past.
Yes, thank you so very much for sharing. And before I go forward to the next person, because I see we have some hands in here, for those of you who do not know what we're talking about, this is our book that we've been reading here over the law school. And it's While the Black Kids Are Sitting in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race by Dr. Beverly Tatum, okay? Just so we're all on the same page and everyone is on one accord in terms of our responses. Yes.
For me, like reading this book, it just like brought a flashback of memories for me. I grew up in like a predominantly white area, and so just reading throughout the book, I would like have these flashbacks to my childhood and my experience, and I would be like, wow, these are things that like, you know, as a child you don't recognize, but like looking back now as an adult, I'm just like, wow, these, you know, these are very real things, and I've gone through these experiences and just maybe never realized that. So for me, like every time I turn the page, it's just like a flashback of memories the entire time.
And you know what, and thank you for being very brave and sharing that experience, because when I was reading the book, or rereading the book rather, Dr. Tatum talked about as early as like 3 and 4 years old, children start to learn what stereotypes are. They're able to identify color, they're able to identify stereotypes, and they even start embracing those stereotypes. And if you remember from the research with the doll test, they actually used that research to talk about Brown versus Board of Education and how separate wasn't always equal, right? And the importance and the impact of segregation on people of color, and how it was time to basically allow integration to happen at the university. And I know with the 1Ls during orientation, we talked a little bit about how Mercer was very integral in the integration, even the University of Georgia, and then voluntarily went into integration itself with the admittance of Sam Oney on the undergraduate campus. So thank you so very much for sharing that, because it is important to recognize that you almost have to have these conversations with a 3 and 4 year old. When you might be thinking about Lego blocks and numbers and shapes, it has to be, well, let's talk about race and the social construct of race. I'm brown and you're brown and all the different colors. And that's why Crayola really went out and made that diverse now colors of crayon box so that students can have that conversation about race. So thank you so very much for sharing. Okay, do we have another comment here? Yes.
I
Well.
I'm an attorney at Aflac and housing cops in the Mercer BLSA. I thought it was so relevant that that book is still current today. I was a student at Spelman and Dr. Tatum was our president. So as I'm trying to diversify our internship for Aflac Legal, I think the same conversations that Dr. Tatum had around racial biases, prejudices, they're still so relevant today as we're having discussions within our legal department that we're a very diverse company, that we're geared to the Aflac way, but we're still working on diversifying our internship program and making it look like what America looks like. But that book I read as a freshman at Spelman, now, many years later, those conversations are still so relevant today. So I think that's the most interesting thing that I took from it and this conversation today.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for your support. And we look forward to working with you in the future. I think it's very important that we alumni reach back and we have these conversations and we continue to help move the school, allow Mercer University altogether, move towards a more inclusive future that we all talk about here in the book. So the question for the audience is, what were your thoughts about the book overall? Are there any other thoughts for the people in the room? Okay, yes.
For me personally, it highlighted that we have definitely come a long way and that we're still a longer route to go, and that I think that it still highlights that we can kind of get comfortable, and that especially since like the election of President Barack Obama, that his like image as the president, a lot of people like from that think like, oh, we have a black president, like we've come a long way, but that is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's still more work that needs to be done. So I feel like the book really did a good job of highlighting that.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay.
I would say for me, this book was really a catalyst
Okay.
to do research and to see how deep this goes. Because just like Bianca said, I had,
Okay.
so just like Bianca was saying, it makes you realize just how many microaggressions and just how many different things you dealt with your whole life. And like, even right now in the room, you can see it. I have to sit. And it's psychological to a point. And I even did research and found out about resumes.
Okay.
And how like, my name's Lakeisha, Young. But if I put like L Young, so you wouldn't know my first name, people may be able to look at my zip code. People may be able to look at what previous jobs I've had and use that information to determine what my race is and make a bias from that. So just seeing how deep it is and how entrenched it is. And it's not even on purpose, it's just what we're used to at this point, unfortunately. And just really got me thinking about like, what can we do to change it? Because it's gonna be deep work. Like it's one of those things you gotta get at the root.
Yes.
To make a real change.
Thank you so much. I almost did like some deep snaps or some claps for all of your comments here. And I think you really touched on a great point here. You talk about the bias, like how we are all biased. And again, those unconscious bias really shapes our attitudes, our viewpoints, how we view other individuals, how we interact. It affects our healthcare, affects the profession of law. It impacts, political, social, economic change. And again, if you want to address some of these problems, like you said, you have to do research on it, use the data, use statistics, and get to the root of the issues that we're having in our country, in our university, and even in our city that we live. So thank you so much for sharing that, okay? So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna transition. Thank you all for bearing with me and being patient and sharing your thoughts and your ideas with the book tonight. I'm actually gonna go ahead and get ready for the main event, right? And I'm going to introduce Attorney Rye. So again, I'm going to do that really, really quickly as she gets ready to log on. So Angela Rye is an attorney and principal CEO of Impact Strategies and political advocacy firm in Washington, D.C., as well as a professional commentator, among other things. She is highly sought after for her practical, common sense approach to political strategy, issue advocacy, and public engagement. She has an unwavering commitment to ensuring positive change in the political process, as well as known for her willingness to speak candidly about a multitude of topics. Attorney Rye is a regular on-air personality who can be seen on several media outlets, including BET, CNN, and MSNBC. Across the nation, she engages in challenging conversations with private sector leaders, civil rights advocates, social justice proponents, and community organizers. She has become a critical voice of conviction on many of the pressing issues of our time, including our national politics, race in America, criminal and social justice, and other political issues. It is my honor and esteemed pleasure to welcome you today. Thank you so very much for being with us.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Yes. So if you don't mind, we'll just go ahead and get into the questions, if that's okay with you.
Sounds perfect. Thank you all again. I know this is very odd and a different way to engage with students, particularly at law school, but you know, coronavirus.
Coronavirus. Yes, yes, yes. We're bearing it together. We're bearing it together. We roar together. That's our theme here at Mercer University. With a bear, we roar together.
All right.
Yeah, we were a bear. We were a bear. All right. So, so the first question, to get things started, why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your legal background and then your journey through law school?
Sure. So I was just thinking before I logged on, like, I cannot believe it's been 15 years since I graduated from law school. It really feels like just the other day, maybe because of the trauma of all the work we had to do, maybe because of, you know, just the game-changing experience it was in terms of helping me to develop as a leader through the National Black Law Students Association. But it really was an amazing journey. When I started law school, I had the intention of being an entertainment and sports agent, and it took one incident to get me out of that. I was like literally standing on the altar after church, after the benediction, and my pastor, who is also my goddad, said to a football player who played for the Seahawks at the time to talk to me about his experience. He told him that I wanted to be a sports agent. And so he said to me, like, without missing a beat, as soon as my goddad walked away, if I let you represent me, what you gonna give me? And I was like, and that's that. I won't be doing that work. You know, shout out to people that do engage in their work that way. That's not how I'm sexually empowered, okay? So then the next thing that happened, and also this was right after the benediction at church. So I don't know how many of y'all say amen, but clearly he's a heathen. The other thing is I grew up, you know, really admiring a lot of trial lawyers. And one of those trial lawyers was Johnny Cochran, who, when I was in high school, of course, defended O.J. Simpson and had one of the best closing arguments in history. And I was like, okay, I want to work, you know, at the Cochran firm. So then the Cochran firm became my mission. I started an internship my last semester in law school after summering at firms and feeling like this check is good, but this experience is terrible. And went to intern for Congresswoman Maxine Waters, which was like such an honor and a privilege. And she's dope. It's so great to see young people now calling her Auntie Maxine. I'm like, she ain't new to this, she true to this.
Auntie Maxine.
Yeah, and she's dope. I call her Queen Maxine because I'm
Queen
like,
Maxine.
let me put her on the pedestal she deserves to be on. But in her office, she kept telling me that she thought I should work in politics. And I was like, no, I'm gonna be the, you know, female Johnny Cochran. And while I was in the office, I ended up getting a mentor named Sean Chapman Holly, who no longer works at the firm, but we are still close. And I ended up getting an offer from the Cochran firm. We were negotiating negotiating my offer during then my second semester last year in law school, and then he died. I was actually at the NABALSA conference when he died. And so Congresswoman Waters came to the conference. We asked her to be a speaker. I was introducing her, getting ready to introduce her. Mind you, Johnny Cochran was like her real friend. And I walk up to Congresswoman Waters and I'm like, Johnny Cochran died. What am I going to do now? So without missing a beat, talk about selfish and trifling, but alas, here we are. She said back to me, I told you that you need to go to the Hill. And I still didn't end up doing that, but I was like, I do like working within politics. I loved working with her. She understood the balance of activism and politics so well, and it didn't seem like an unnatural flow at all. But I ended up going to work at NAFIO, which represents the interest of Black colleges, both predominantly Black and historically Black. And I did that for a year and a half, and then the Democrats took over and I went to the Hill. And then I went to this Homeland Security Committee where I did a lot of stuff in a lot of different spaces, but my law degree really informed how I could negotiate legislation. And from there, I went to the Congressional Black Caucus, where I served as the executive director and general counsel. And then I started my own political strategy firm. And I think every day I use my law degree, whether it's writing, because I didn't learn how to write really until law school, whether it's how I craft an argument for TV, if I know what we're talking about, which is not always the case, but I think that my law degree certainly helped me become a better strategist. And I'm grateful for that.
Yes. Excellent. I like this. I like your story and how you came full circle. I love that. And had a revelation moment in church. I had a revelation moment like that with my last degree too. So that was interesting.
I wish these heathens would stay off the altar with their requests. Like, I was like, what?
Yeah, my revelation came through the mail when my application was lost. So that was yeah.
I don't do it.
Don't do it. Okay. But again, so I just want to talk about challenges, right? So a challenge often faced by many minority professionals is finding adequate access to mentors and then fighting off preconceived biases based upon race. How important has mentorship in your life been? You talked about Queen Maxine and the late Johnny Cochran. So how has those mentors been in your life?
Yeah, and actually I want to shout out again, Sean Chapman Holly. I did not ever get the opportunity to meet Johnny Cochran. It's a huge regret, but I'm so grateful for the people I did meet in his firm, including Sean, who's still a big sister to this day. I can tell you, the proverb is that it takes a village to raise a child. And I often say it takes an even larger one to sustain an adult. We are constantly growing and evolving. And I'm so grateful for every mentor who still will take my call. I'm not beyond the age or the capacity or the need of mentorship. I'm grateful that I count my parents as mentors and can call them and get advice and get counsel. The pastoral circle that I have in that regard, my therapist, I feel like in a lot of ways, therapists and folks who we seek out for mental support are advisors and can be mentoring or at least shepherding shepherding us through our journey of life. I think about many ways in which our instructors, even in law school, can be mentors to us, and how teachers, whether they're pre-K to law school, help to shape our minds. And even if we're not in touch with them, I'm just thinking of them and sending gratitude and love their way right now for all the many ways that they help to develop me. But constantly, seek out my mentors and talk to them regularly. A lot of them are members of Congress. I thank God for the mentors who are also my peers, the mentors who are younger than me, those who may have interned for me or worked for me at some point, or just mentees of my own that also, feed that cycle of mentorship that I'm so grateful for.
Yes. And so how would you suggest that the attorneys in the room seek out those mentors?
I think one of the worst things that you can do is to walk up to somebody and be like, will you mentor me? It doesn't really happen that way. It never really has for me. I feel like a mentorship relationship is organic and it's where there's chemistry. It's just like if you're dating someone, it's like sometimes it fits and sometimes it doesn't. And the best way to ensure it's not going to fit is to walk up to somebody and say, can you be my mentor? So it really is finding someone where you can hold a conversation and where you can ask questions and get feedback that it resonates with you. Even if you don't agree with it, it still resonates with you. It's registering somewhere. And then I think openness to the fact that they may not be in your same exact field. Sometimes, they may not be lawyers. They may be people who are engineers or doctors, or they may be, someone who's an essential worker, and I'm not talking about a medical doctor, maybe somebody that's in a different role. It may be someone who is, an organizer, an activist, or a teacher in some other way, and just opening yourself up to the fact that we can grow from people who serve in a variety of roles in society. I think that is when we really grow. My therapist the other day, she's a holistic therapist, she said that we know when we've reached mastery, and it's when we finally understand that we will be lifelong apprentices, right? So being able to learn and to receive from a variety of people, not being a respecter of persons, but being open to any and all.
I love that. I love that.
I wish it was mine, but it's
Yes,
not.
but you know what? You articulated it so well. I love it. I love it.
Thank
So,
you.
how would you define success as a Black woman in the legal field?
Define it by not putting it in a box.
Okay.
I don't think that there is, you know, Black people are not monolithic. Black women certainly are not, and Black women in the legal field aren't. I think there are Black women in the legal field who use their law degrees but never took the bar exam. There are, you know, Black women who are judges, and there are Black women who are law clerks and for judges. There are Black women who are the dopest trial attorneys around. Some who are, you know, public defenders, some who are prosecutors, some who are trial lawyers in firms, plaintiffs, attorneys, and folks who, you know, may defend big business. But they, you know, come in all types. And I think that what you can count on is that Black women will show up and show up mightily, whether recognized or not. And so if there is something that makes us monolithic, I would say it's because we are so consistent and lead and can balance so much. We carry so much, but I hope that we soon reach the point where we don't carry more than our burden. I say often now that Zora Neale Hurston might have said that Black women are the mules of the world, but I don't think that she meant that as an affirmation. I think she meant that as something that we need to course correct because it's not healthy.
I mean, I'm taking some nuggets here. I'm taking some notes here. I'm taking some notes. This is good stuff. So, according to the American Bar Association's National Lawyer Population Survey, women made up just 35% of the legal profession in 2017. Can you talk about the challenges you have faced as a woman of color in the legal profession, more specifically concerning the development of your legal voice and creating a space for yourself in a white male-dominated profession?
You know, this is where I have to acknowledge my point of privilege. My point of privilege is that since my internship with Congresswoman Waters in the fall of 2004, I have never had a white boss. Right? So, you know, from going from her to NAFIO, where my boss was Dr. Leslie Baskerville, a Black woman attorney, from there to the Committee on Homeland Security, where my boss was a Black man by the name of Benny Gordon Thompson from Mississippi, and is the chair right now of the Homeland Security Committee. My privilege is that after that, I left there and went to work for the Congressional Black Caucus, where the chair was Emmanuel Cleaver from Kansas City, Missouri, also a Black man who was in the Black Panther Party. And from there, I'm running my own firm. So I guess if there's anything, it would be that my clients, I think you can argue that your clients are in some way your bosses. They hold you accountable. They ensure the deliverables are what they ask for and that kind of thing. But my privilege is just that, right? So I don't know, you know, what white men are doing in the legal field to hold Black women down. What I can say is my experience is it gets real frustrating to be the youngest, the only woman, and the only Black owned firm in so many rooms, consultant tables. It is frustrating having some of the same conversations that I've had with the Democratic Party since I worked at the Congressional Black Caucus around representation in employment ranks, around representation at consultant tables, about representation with media ad buy firms. I can say that it's even more frustrating when you start talking about content creators. Now, the work that we're doing in the media space and how few production companies are given the same opportunities as white production companies when they're Black owned or Black women owned and led. I think that so many of the problems and challenges we have are not industry specific. They are nationwide, and in some instances, international crises. And they need to be treated as such.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the next question talks a little bit about we look at race and ethnicity. So it says that according to the ABA's survey again, only 5% of active attorneys identify as either Black or African American, and only 5% identify as either Hispanic or Latinx in 2017. And then the percentage of active attorneys identifying as Asian or Pacific Islander remained steady at 2%, while those who identified as Native American or Indigenous people remained around 1%. What is the importance of having diverse representation in the legal field?
It's important. It's mission critical. It is not just specific to the legal field. We need representation everywhere. When we talk about representation in the legal field, it's about the people who make, shape, and argue the law. It is about ensuring there is culturally competent representation for clients and for companies. It is about ensuring that people understand nuance when shaping arguments. It is about who decides what the law is in courtrooms. It is, you know, when you think about the number of judicial nominees that Donald Trump has been able to get confirmed, and you realize that there's not a single Black appellate judge who's been confirmed. You realize it then. You feel the impact of us when we're not present, when we are treated as though we are invisible or as if we don't matter. And so the bottom line is, no matter the industry, no matter the profession, there needs to be Black representation. It needs to look like the face of America. You need to understand our diverse and divergent perspectives, but they need to be there. And then we also have to understand the importance of what that Black representation looks like and the responsibility of Black representation. Because I'll tell you what, I would prefer a white progressive attorney general over Daniel Cameron if it means that when they speak her name in a public place, Breonna Taylor's name in a public place, that she would not be tokenized just for a hashtag to go viral in the moment, but that her life would actually matter as much, or if not more so, than the bullets that were shot into her white neighbor's house that didn't hit anyone, right? So when we start talking about a Clarence Thomas or a Daniel Cameron who endanger Black lives, I think that we also have to talk about that. It's not that just any Black person will do. It's that there are Black people who are tied to what is culturally responsible and necessary for Black people.
I love that. I totally agree that representation and visibility are definitely important, and especially that cultural representation, that cultural competency in all sectors, in all fields are very, very important. So the next question, I want to talk a little bit about your journey at Seattle University School of Law. Could you please describe for us the campus cultural climate as it relates to race during your matriculation, and what advice do you have for students that attend predominantly white institutions?
Yeah, I would say, based on some of my other friends' experiences, Seattle U was very welcoming. There was the head of admissions at the time was Carol Cochran, who would become like a big sister to me. There was a Black woman, Dean Demings, who was, you know, always our ride or die. And then there were people in administration who I fought, and often, for dollars for BLSA, to ensure that some of the other students in the school could attend the BLSA conferences. That honestly was our biggest fight, the budget representation and reminding them how much money we were spending on tuition. I'm trying to think, I feel like we had 2 Black professors at the time. No, we had 3. Okay. We had 3 and I was close to all of them. Was that sufficient? No. But I did appreciate the fact that the Black professors we had and the Black person who we had in administration and the Black admissions person were people who all could understand our posture on a lot of things and were supportive and helpful. Again, that wasn't the testimony for a lot of my friends in other schools. The climate at the time, I got into a lot of debates in class around race. I remember when we learned about adverse possession, and when I was a 1L, like going toe to toe with the professor, like, so basically y'all just colonizing in people's houses. That's what we doing, right? Like y'all make up a law for stealing shit, but when we do that, right, people be under the jail. You talking about 3 strikes you out. You was like, how many more houses can we steal? So I used to like argue about like how this was the epitome of whiteness, and then, you know, it just kind of was what it was. But I still think that, by the way. I'm trying to think of what else. I don't know. I felt really supported in my law school career. Stop! The dog that came up here and is trying to get paper. You can't have this.
Listen, that sounds like my dog Browning.
God, I don't know what the obsession is with paper. Yeah. Can you get off of this? Oh, he has some in his mouth. Fine, eat it. God. Anyway, can you at least not bump my chair? What are we talking about? Adverse possession right here happening.
Yeah, how many?
Right, happening right here. Do you see him?
Oh, you have a big dog. See, I have a little dog. Oh, but it's okay. What kind of dog is that?
Smokey is crazy. Smokey is a Connie Corso. Chewing the doggone paper.
Friday. Smokey.
That's terrible. Anyway, so yeah, Smokey the dog is not high, but he's definitely living his best life with this paper.
Living his best life. That's right. The new normal. Everybody's
yes. So yeah, I think that overall, I know that, like, again, from a point of privilege, my experience was good. Like, it wasn't a lot of Black folks, but it was more than so many of some of the folks that I was doing the balsa work with. Like, tremendously different. There were some students that had larger Black student bodies where they had more support and more folks willing to kind of invest in the balsa and that kind of thing. But overall, I think my experience was good. I think that another point of privilege is being born and raised in Seattle. My dad is a pretty well-known activist. And so the teachers who were there, I lied, we have 4. Right, Adamson, Christian Halliburton, Natasha Martin, Dean Demings did teach some classes, and then we had Carol Cochran. We had 5 people on the faculty. And see, I still remember their names because they left impressions on me. But yeah, my dad being pretty well known, I feel like I had that too as a point of privilege, especially in the broader legal community. I grew up going to bar association events, right? Okay. So that's just a different dynamic. It's a good thing about staying at home, and it's also the bad thing of staying at home, because sometimes you want to go where nobody knows your name, not where everybody does. So you like, oh, you Eddie Ride's daughter, you know? Yeah, see, that was I'm like live 45 minutes from where I work now. So every time, you Linda Booker's daughter, you Red Booker's daughter. I was like, oh, Lord, they know me. Got to go 2 hours away from home to go to school now. Yeah. So with Dr. Tatum's book, she speaks a little bit about the complexities of shaping one's racial identity and how society contributes to how we see ourselves. Has there ever been a time in your career or life even that you struggle with your identity as a woman of color? Did you ever experience imposter syndrome, or maybe the exact opposite, feeling as though the weight of your community or family was resting on your shoulders? So I feel like yes to imposter syndrome, but I never felt like I needed to be anything other than Black. Like, again, another point of privilege. I know it's not white privilege, but I do think it's important to recognize privilege. I grew up in the house with both parents feeling like showing me my Blackness was everything. So there was Black art on the walls. There's Black books on the shelves. I had Black dolls. And like, I remember my mom getting me a Sasha doll that was my color because she thought it was important for me to have brown skin dolls my color, dolls with red hair and freckles, like a spectrum. So I understood like the importance of all of this Black beauty. There was a Anheuser-Busch like piece of art they commissioned. We had the poster. My mom cut off the logo, so I didn't think that I should drink beer at a young age, but it was mounted on my wall. And we would look at the poster and point out who looked like who in the family, right? These Black kings and queens, who looked like this king, who looked like that queen. And it shaped what I believe about Black being beautiful. I never thought negatively about the varying textures of Black hair. I never thought that any shade of Black was not beautiful. And I think because of that, I always showed up like being Black is dope. That's truly what I believed. And then I think growing up and kind of coming of age and maturing in the 90s, like I graduated from high school in 1998. Like that was like hip hop was shaping fashion and culture and, you know, what we could say about our political leanings or, you know, our empowerment. And I think that just also solidified what I believed about myself. I think imposter syndrome is a little bit different because it hits at the heart of what we believe about ourselves because of what someone told us or didn't tell us. Imposter syndrome to me is about trying to conform to something that you find what you think is more acceptable based on codependent tendencies and not believing that you are enough, which is more of an interdependent tendency. So I think, you know, hell, damn near every time I go in a new environment, I'm dealing with imposter syndrome. It's like, you know, am I acceptable here? Am I accepted here? And I remember there was one moment, especially after like started becoming more known. I just done a speech and I was still very awkward when people asked me about taking pictures. Like, can we take a picture with you? I used to be like, why? Right? Like, you know, why would you want to do that? And I remember this young lady saying, can we take a picture? And I was like, okay, if you really want one. And she came up behind me and when her hand touched my back, it was shaking. And I realized in that moment that the person requesting the picture is just as uncomfortable as I am being asked to take the picture because I just didn't feel, I'm like, why would you want a picture with me? Like, who am I? You know, but I started realizing like, oh my God, it took a lot of courage for her to ask for this. And so I need to be courageous too and just accept this love. And when I started being more open about accepting the love, because that's all it really was, I haven't been trolled yet by a picture. I'm sure that day will come where somebody's like, look at this dumbass I took a picture with. But like, you know, when I received it in that way, it's become so filling for me. And being able to receive it is humbling because I realize there are people who don't have the same type of platform who are relying on me to show up in a certain way. That doesn't mean to be inauthentic, but it does mean to rise to the occasion of leadership. And so now it's kind of fun. My team makes fun of me because I'm like, we got to take all the pictures because I'm like, they were bold enough to come and stand in this line. I'm not leaving, which pisses off a lot of people because it throws off schedules sometimes. But guess what we're not doing right now? Taking pictures. Hi, Zoom.
Hi, Zoom. Like, take a large group picture right now.
Man.
So, do you want to get this last question before we move? Okay. So I'm gonna give you one last question for myself, and then we're gonna switch over to the audience Q&A, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the late Congressman John Lewis stated that every generation leaves behind a legacy. With that legacy will be determined by the people of that generation. Will you offer some words of encouragement to the future attorneys in this room about cultivating their legacy in the legal profession?
I would say play your part. And that doesn't mean to play small. It just means that as many paths, because I know, well, I'll at least speak from my position in law school. In law school, I was trying to study people's paths so that I could follow in someone else's shoes, but that's not going to be your journey. And so as many people as you admire and you respect and you want to model your career after, accept the fact that your career path is uniquely yours. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try anything and everything you want to. And in fact, I would encourage you to do just that. Try everything you want to. I remember someone telling me that when I was saying all the things I had interest in, that I could not be a jack of all trades, that I had to be a master of something. But I'm Jack, you know what I mean? And if you're Jack too, that's okay. Try everything you want to try. Pursue everything that interests you. If some of those things can't be done during your day job, volunteer. You know, talk to some of your friends to see like, oh, you know, I want to create some of this content over here, but I also want to write, but I also want to work on some of this strategy, and I also do all of that. You live life one time. And I think the most important thing is that you live your best life, Lil Duval, that you, you know, fulfill every aspect of your vision that you have, that you strive to stir up every gift you have and utilize every talent you've been given. And I think when you do some of that, you'll find the more specific path. But I think why narrow for no reason at the beginning, at the outset? It's pointless and it's no fun.
It's no fun. Yeah. I think, look, hi, Jack. I'm Jack too. So, okay, we're going to start the Zoom questions. Okay. I can't see them. There's no questions on my side. Okay. Is Smokey okay?
Girl, he went to sleep.
Oh, okay. Look, he's like,
He said
it's
he got
after
tired. All that napkin chewing made him sleepy. This dog is crazy.
all that fiber. And then that.
I don't think he swallowed anything. He just ripped it up.
He just ripped it up. Okay. All right. So is it Taylor Wilson?
Hi. So I am a 3L at Mercer Law, checking in on Zoom. I do have a question for you, Miss Angela. So I can say for myself that I'm definitely a fired up, I want to do a lot with my community as far as my JD is concerned. And I can say, especially for our chapter, we've been doing a lot of forging through the fire, trying to keep that drive, that motivation, and keep doing good and, making change. However, it seems like we kind of get gut punched every couple weeks with something. And yesterday's, announcement that there won't be any real charges for Breonna Taylor's murder was really one of those gut punches that kind of like knocked the air. It kind of feels like out of the movement for a second. You kind of reorient yourself and like, wow, we really aren't as far as we thought we were. So I would like to know what your opinions are, not only on the grand jury decision to not bring any charges against the murderers, but also your advice on how to kind of regroup after consistently taking so many hits, not just as Black people, but a part of the legal profession when you know that process and you kind of know how we got there. So what would your advice be for us on how we continue to maintain?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really is hard right now for so many reasons, because it's not just the tragedy that is the lack of charges in a Breonna Taylor case, but it's also, the slow moving nature of what's happened with Ahmaud Arbery's case, or what's happening with George Floyd, or where I'm from in Seattle, there's a suburb called Tacoma, Manuel Ellis, that many of you haven't heard of, but who died the same way, who was killed the same way George Floyd was. One of the best things we can do for them and for the shoulders upon which we stand is not give up. I think so often at how people, when you're reciting what happened in the 60s, you say it as if it happened all in an instant. But some of those folks started organizing in the late 50s. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 64 after several years of strategic action, targeted action, and organizing. The Voting Rights Act was passed after a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge where John Lewis was hit in the head, where several other people almost lost their lives. And they've been talking about it for years. They had been organizing around it for years. 1968, the Fair Housing Act would not have passed without the death of Dr. King. Now, I'm not saying that we should go to seek and be martyrs, but I am suggesting that sometimes I have to check myself. Maybe this isn't you all struggle, but in an internet, social media, super quick hit, viral moment generation, it's hard to remember how long change has taken in this country. Do I think that it should take that long forever? No. Am I with incrementalism, the only way that we see change as Black people? Absolutely not. But I'm also absolutely against working against incremental change to prove a point when that won't do anything but kill more of us, right? And so I think that we have to be strategic, we have to be focused, we have to be hopeful, we have to remain optimistic in the face of adversity. I know exactly what you're talking about. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not a Black woman. In fact, she only had one Black law clerk throughout the duration of her tenure, but she was an ally for and with us on several judicial opinions. She even shouted out Thurgood Marshall in this really dope clip I just saw. and how much he borrowed from his jurisprudence, right? And what I would say to you is that we have to be smart enough to find our allies so that we can work out what our permanent interests are. And we cannot get tired or grow weary in well-doing. And I can understand why you're tired and over it, because I certainly am. But we have to rest and then get up to fight another day. It's not just for us, it's for future generations. That is literally what our ancestors did. They fought really hard so that our fight would be a little easier. And that's what we owe the next generation.
Thank you, Taylor. Okay, our next question.
Hi, I'm Kathy Cox. I'm the dean here at the law school.
I'm looking around like I can see anything if I lean this way.
You have like two different cameras, so.
I'm like,
okay, there she is. Now you can see her kind of from the side.
yeah, I see. Hello.
I want to follow up on the question about change and about politics, because I've been in politics also, and ask you about your work on the Hill. How often did you run into situations where, in trying to effect change through Congress, did you run into situations where you saw a gap in racial understanding or racial sensitivity, maybe large or small, and how did you work through that to effect change in policy and in laws?
Yeah, on the Hill, what I think is so interesting about the Hill is working on the committee and working for the CBC was an anomaly, because on the committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, Congressman Thompson was very serious about hiring young people and Black people. So we were the most diverse and the youngest committee on the Hill. That meant that there were often people, even progressives, who were talking down to us because they thought we didn't know anything or thought we didn't know better or whatever. We used to bring in CEOs to talk to them about their diversity policy and how it needed to change. We would match them with other businesses outside to talk about where they could formulate some type of partnership. We talked to government contractors and folks who wanted to do business with the government, particularly Black and women-owned businesses, about opportunities within the Department of Homeland Security, which at the time was the third largest federal purchaser. So we were regularly doing those kinds of things. And one of the things that came up the most, and I know probably all the Black folks in the room have heard this, but they would talk to us about, as they address diversity, oh, we'll do this if they're qualified, right? And it would be like, child, we're not even having this conversation with you about nobody unqualified, right? So having that, and then having that experience, whether we were talking to corporate, whether we were talking to the DNC, the DCCC, or the DSCC, or the convention, whether we were talking to the largest defense contractors and corporations in the world, or a committee, we had that same conversation over and over again. So race was always front and center. Intellect was always questioned. Qualifications were always questioned. And you just learn to keep going. Like, you can't be distracted with that. The most important thing is that your end goal is achieved.
Thank you. I think someone in the back right here.
First of all, thanks for taking the time to meet with us today. Thanks for BLSA. Thanks to BLSA for putting on such a great event. I've always been raised by my family that that just being a good person to people, treating everybody equally, was good enough. And as I've grown older, I've kind of started to change my mindset on that. That there obviously needs to be more done. You brought up earlier that it takes a village. I've always agreed with that mindset, that it takes a village to be the change you want to see in the world. I was wondering, my question is what more can people do than just being good to people to help solve a lot of the problems that we're having conversations about today?
Yeah, I think being good to people is about kindness. But what also has to happen is people utilizing their privilege to tear down systems of oppression, right? It's not just kindness. Kindness is a characteristic, but if people are left out, downtrodden, invisible, or treated as voiceless because systems exist that are not there for them, and in fact were designed against them, then that means privilege and allyship has to be used to help undo some of that. And I think before we can get to undoing, we have to get to acknowledging. And so I think one of your first steps is acknowledging and then helping other people to see that that is what indeed is before us. I'm trying to think of I think that's good enough, actually. I think that's a good start.
Okay. Well, I think our time is up. I do thank you so very much on behalf of Mercer University School of Law. Thank you for your encouraging words, your inspiring stories, and we look forward again to being the change we want to see. Thank you so very much. Give a round of applause.
I think it's all angels just walk by. There goes a sight from my soul.
So we'll get started. So I just want to say thank you all for still being in attendance and still staying strong after we just fellowship for a little bit. What were your thoughts about any of the statements that Attorney Rye made during her conversation? We'll just kind of start there. Any thoughts? Good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down. Not so sure. Okay. Any thoughts? Any comments? Okay. Yes. Okay. Go for it.
I thought it was really informative and relatable, I would say, as a Black woman that is seeking to be in the legal profession. I was able to relate to a lot of things she said, also being out in corporate America before I came to law school. So I think it was a great little spiel on her life and her journey to where she is now, and her answers to the questions were really good and inspiring as well.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I think there's some two hands over here. Sid is going to get her steps in today. I've been in a TV show.
I guess the whole time in the back of my mind, I was like, people that are hearing this are the ones that are open to hearing it. And they're here because they want to know more about the topic. So I guess I thought, I was like, how can we get people who didn't sign up for this to hear this stuff? And that's just like a question I thought I had in the back of my mind the whole time. Just because I'm not saying that I know everything by any means, but I'm willing to learn, and everyone by being here is also willing to learn and open to the conversation. So I guess my thought was, how do we get beyond that?
For me personally, and I know it's like a talk show now at this point, so now I feel like Oprah, but I think it's one of those things, we talk about each one teach one, but each one reach one, right? That's my motto when it comes to diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. Just looking for opportunities in which we can engage other individuals. Do I need this one? Okay, so we can engage other individuals. Like you said, sometimes we feel like we're preaching to the choir. Those that want to engage and want to learn more are already here and present. But I always encourage students, faculty, and even staff, if there's an event happening, bring someone that you think could benefit from the conversation. Because sometimes I think there's an intimidation factor. People feel as though they're going to be called out. They don't know the right things to say. But again, just remind everybody that we're all learning together. We're all in this continuum of learning and educating ourselves and bringing awareness to the conversation. And then I know one way that we also do it is things as simple as what you're doing here, using book clubs. Because now we have a common principle or a common practice or something we can refer back to and have an engaging conversation. But like you're right. So again, the next time we have an event, grab one person, then they grab another person. Because I think, again, even like how we're sitting, there's always sometimes safety and comfort even in numbers. So I think that'll be important. Okay. Did you have your hand raised?
We have one on Zoom.
Zoom?
Go ahead, Brittany.
She muted. The tagline of 2020, you're muted.
There we go. One thing I really appreciated that Miss Angela did was acknowledge her own privilege and the fact that we, as even just Black people or just people from different backgrounds, we all experience the world differently. And I think what she did was a great example of noticing her privilege and being able to shape what she viewed and how she experienced the world through that privilege, and that there is no one Black experience, that we're all different and we all should be approached, and people should be approached as their own individual person.
Yes, I love that. And I don't remember the page in the book. Thank you so very much, Brittany. There was a page in the book, or a couple pages in the books where Dr. Tatum really talks about, I think it's in the identity section, where she talks about, you know, acknowledging her privilege, right? So again, privilege is not necessarily just in like the book, White Fragility, talking about white privilege. But again, we all can have a measure of privilege, just like we all can be biased, because privilege is not necessarily secluded to just race, but again, it's about your social economic status, sexual orientation, your religion, your ability. So all those things, veteran status, all those things can contribute to your intersectionality, to your identity, and even to your form of privilege. But the thing about privilege is you want to make sure that you're a good steward of the privileges that you're provided, and that you make sure that you are helping to empower other individuals that you may recognize, or that may have or amplify their voice when you feel as though, or they may feel as though, or they have recognized that they don't have the same privileges and rights that you all have. So again, I think that's one thing that we can do to make sure that we understand, mitigate, and recognize the privilege that we all may have in this world and this society.
Well, I'm gonna be honest before we go on, as far as how the book goes, I really skimmed through it. As soon as we got back, I know they weren't very merciless with the evidentiary. But something that I thought she really spoke on that was powerful was talking about incremental change. And something I really thought she embodied was this morning I listened to this thing about our founding fathers, how it's sort of scary in a way to think that they're slave owners on our currency. However, you look at some of the things they wrote, like We the People, it was a great idea. But at the time, they didn't completely embrace it. But I really think her talking about incremental change really showed, I think, that we're really, you know, having these conversations or moving in that right direction where we can have a vocal forum and really get that out there.
Yeah. And I like that you point that out too, again, and, you know, your honesty about the book, you know, again, I think it's very important that you took the time to read it. I think it's very important that you took the time to come to this webinar, to this seminar. And I think it's very important that you took the time to voice your opinion and share, because again, when you educate yourself, it's just not one time that you read a book, right? Like you said, you watched a webinar, you watched a different sermon, you watched a different opportunity there to engage in conversation. I think it's very, very important. And I like the steps of incremental change as well myself, personally. And like she mentioned too, with Dr. King and John Lewis, again, they were met with opposition, but they kept having resilience. They kept going back the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. And a lot of things about the civil rights movement, it was very diverse. You know, it wasn't just people of color. It was people of all shades and all nationalities and all social economic backgrounds that helped to move the civil rights movement forward. And I think we think about the civil rights movement being like 70, 80, 90 years ago, but it actually was very recent in times. And you see a lot of that same rhetoric, the same concerns being very prevalent in 2020 as we move towards more human rights and addressing some of those issues that are still persistent in our country. So I think incremental change, I definitely agree, is going to be the way in which we address some of the problems that we have in our society.
So I'm from Waycross, Georgia.
Okay,
which
Waycross.
is a stone's throw away from Brunswick.
Okay.
Obviously is where Ahmaud Arbery was killed. And I say that for two reasons. One, growing up there, I did not realize, and this goes to speak to what you said earlier, I did not realize the tensions that were there in Waycross at the time. And I think that shows what you said earlier, that this is not just we as people who are getting to the point where children may be on the near horizon or whatever, I think we have a responsibility to teach immediately that exists and that it's going on actively. And I just want to commend you for that point. And secondly, what happened in Brunswick could have easily happened in Waycross. laws. And that really scared me and it shook me because there are plenty of people that I know in Lake Cross that I grew up with that I did not realize that that was the truth for them. And there are plenty of people who still don't accept and realize that that is the truth for people that they grow up with.
Yeah.
And my question to kind of compound is, how do we, as people who, again, like we don't know everything, and I won't ever say that I know everything, but how do we reach those people that don't care, that aren't receptive? How do we break that to where, and some of those people were my friends and were people that I grew up around and hung out with. And I just don't know what to do because I don't want to see them as a lost cause, but at the same time, how can you affiliate with those people knowing and seeing what they believe and hearing what they say?
I want to look at this question twofold. So the first part, I want to share a story really quickly. So the day after Ahmaud was killed, you know, I was at work and I spoke with a student, and the student was a medical student, and they were in tears. And that student really talked about how fearful and how scared they were because this could have been them, right? And I think a lot of times when you see a lot of the violence and injustices that happen in America, I also think for myself, that could have been me. That could have been my brother, my friend, my cousin, whoever. And I think it's important that we know that we have to recognize and call it out and have to have accountability when we look at some of these instances that happen in our society. So I think having accountability and taking action and you know, that means that means peacefully protesting, and that means writing letters, you know, that means advocating for a hate crime bill. That's just one way that you could address it. And then another thing I want to look at too is that sometimes you will have these very difficult conversations. They have to be courageous conversations. And I know in my line of work, we always talk about this movable middle, right? There are going to be people on both extremes, but you have to work with the people that are willing to change. Sometimes they're first, and let it be a ripple effect as you go out. If you were looking for some text on how to have these conversations with family members or friends or people in your society, people in class, I always talk about the book, So You Want to Talk About Race. They have some great points about how to be an active listener, how to allow people to share their stories. Like you said, when you learn about people's stories that really impacted you, it brought awareness to you and brought a real context to the situation. And so again, I would just say to look for opportunities and ways to have courageous conversations. And if you would like a resource with almost like a dialogue packet, I'm happy to share any of that. Because what it does, it kind of gives you that format on how to frame the conversation. Most of it has to make sure that you're using I statements and you're sticking more to truths and facts than necessarily emotions and feelings. Okay, and I think that's going to be really important. You know, even pulling out statistical data is something that I also do. If we're talking about disparities in like the housing community, we're talking about laws and statutes and policy, I always love to bring out facts. Because again, most times you can have a disagreement or an agreement on the facts, right? So I think that's going to be really important. And again, you know, like Angela said, don't go weary in well-doing. If you reach one person, that's one more person that was educated that wasn't educated the day before. And I think that's very important. Even with this conversation, when we did a lot of conversations like with the book club that we're doing, and y'all are all free to join to the book club that we're doing, the Mercer Justice Socialist Book Club. We're talking about higher learning. And so that's another opportunity. If you don't feel necessarily comfortable having a conversation, ask them they could sit in on our book club or what have you. I think that would be another opportunity. There's also another resource about Thanksgiving conversations where we talk about race, injustices, identity too, that I'm happy to share with you as a resource about how to frame that conversation and have those conversations. And sometimes it may just be that you agree to disagree.
Something that I agree with that has been said earlier is recognizing our privilege, and I think that we need to be able to sort of use our privilege for good because certain people here can access certain communities that I would never really, you know, go and interact with, and maybe I can interact with communities that, you know, other people here may not necessarily, you know, be familiar with. And I think that if we are able to use this privilege that just using our privilege to at least just inform people that don't normally have the access will sort of address the question that Pat was saying, well, what can we do? So I think that's something that
Those are great. Those are great points. Those are definitely great points.
I think it's just another thing that I would like to point out is combating false history.
Okay.
As a history major in high school, not in college, and also just a history book, there's a lot of false history that has been taught, especially in the Deep South. History books can be false. You don't need to believe everything. Even if, like, I have a story of on a state test, they asked what was the purpose of the Civil War. No, slavery was not a multiple choice option. In the booklet, like somebody was gonna read it, I wrote why they were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And just combating those false histories that we have been taught from generation to generation. And also with the civil rights movement, talk to your grandparents. They were alive.
Yeah.
I ask my grandma all the time. She's a white woman. I ask her all the time about, okay, what were you doing during the 60s? She's 80 plus years old. She was there. She was raising kids, but she was there during that time, and she can say first eye perspective of what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So use your resources to learn that history that isn't printed in history books, and also reach out and learn about the history that they try to hide in history books.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very important too. And you know, there's also plenty of documentaries on Netflix, like 13th, When They See Us, Disclosure. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be about race. It can be about any facet or diversity, you know, sexual orientation, religion. So I think it's, again, the most important thing too is to educate yourself, right? You know, they always say, you know, don't trust anyone else's notes and research but your own. So again, that's one of those opportunities I think will be really, really important to glean from that. So I love the fact that we're kind of relearning and reteaching that narrative. So thank you.
So, I too come from a background in corporate America.
I think that's it. No, I hear something.
Yeah, so I come from a background, and I accomplished a lot in a short period of time. So I've been the youngest, only Black person in a room with vice presidents in the company and the C-suite of the company. Y'all know what that means, like the people at the very top. And one thing that I had to learn was you have to be able, like when you do get those microaggressions, sometimes they just don't know. It's not coming from a place of malice, it's coming from a place of them not knowing. And if people offend you, you have to speak up. And you don't have to be rude about it, but you have to be able to say, you know, pull somebody to the side and say, hey, when you said this is how it affected me, this is why. And that kind of gets back to having those conversations, because if you don't speak up, they don't know. And you don't have the opportunity to try to change their mind or show them, hey, when you talk to people, if you're curious about their hair, or you're curious about their background, there's a way you go about those questions. There's a way you go about those conversations. There's a time and a place for those conversations. So I think that's something that was something that I had to learn the hard way, to not get triggered and just realize they don't know. Same thing, some things I didn't know. And so we have to, as you said, meet in the middle, kind of have that dialogue about, hey, I didn't mean to offend you, I didn't know. And when you're brave enough to have that conversation and kind of stick up for yourself and kindly correct somebody, that's a great way to implement change.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. And I want to add one part to it too, because again, even if you're the person that committed the microaggression, and we know that those can come all shapes and forms, you know, don't automatically go into defense mode, right? You know, listen, allow that person to share their experience, to share their narrative and how it really impacted them. Because in that moment, I think there's this sweet moment where we're learning together, right? And then again, once you happen, you know, correct yourself, apologize, and then go forth and even learn more, go further about learning more about microaggressions. You know, read more books about how to be an anti-racist, stamp from the beginning, like we said. You know, and it isn't just this one-off moment, right? Because we all are biased. We can all make these, you know, missteps sometimes, even with microaggressions, and making sure that when we do offend someone, that we correct ourselves in the moment, okay? And then come back. Anyone else? Thoughts? It's like logistics. How do I make it to the back? If you want a list of TED Talks, I have plenty. that address a lot of these concerns. I like videos myself personally.
Okay, so I just had a, I guess, kind of comment in response to what you said, Patrick. I've kind of faced a similar situation as far as maybe like 6 years ago when I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and I just found myself kind of being a minority for the first time in my life. I was around, all my friends ended up being Black, boyfriend ended up being Black. I just found myself being, for the first time, in a position I've never been in. And then when I moved here, it was almost like I got labeled like, oh, she like, hangs out with Black people. It was like a derogatory thing. Like you find yourself aligning with this, I don't think the right mindset to have about it. There's a lot of negative, or you might face a lot of negative reactions from maybe people you grew up with, or even for me, my personal immediate family. And that's really hard, but I feel like you're persistent about how you feel, and you don't let what they say, silence you. Even if you love them, you still say like, this is how I feel and this is what I stand for, and if you don't agree with that, then like she said, agree to disagree. But I find myself a lot of times, like I said, people might say things that aren't nice about you or people you hang out with, but I mean, it's like they're lost. So just it's hard. I know it's nothing compared to actually experiencing the experience of a Black American, but
yeah. And again, I think Angela talks a little bit about this, about, she mentioned the word ally, that term, right? And so what does an ally look like? An ally looks like you. It means showing up even against, having that same uncomfortable experience, being labeled, even being targeted yourself. And again, that's the same thing with a co-conspirator, someone that's an accomplice, because again, you now have seen the struggles that, again, a lot of people of color that they are facing and they're experiencing, not necessarily to the same magnitude, but now you understand what it feels like sometimes to be isolated, to be excluded, right? So I think another part of that with being inclusion is making sure that you have a diverse set of friends, colleagues, you ask people about your experiences, you share. So again, the next time I challenge you all, when you go into the room the next time, don't sit next to your friend, sit next to someone different and actually engage with them in conversation so that you can learn. Because a lot of time, the way we just demystify stereotypes and prejudice, we actually have to encounter a person of that cultural, of that identity to have those conversations. Because again, it's all about education. And a lot of stuff is also rooted in fear and threats, right? And so if you can remove the fear and the threat level, I think we can actually move forward a lot faster and a lot quicker. Because again, a lot of things we see, we're bombarded by it in the media. And again, we're kind of retold that narrative literally every day. That consistent set of bias and stereotypes, even that divisive language we see every day. So again, we have to make sure that we're unlearning some of the things we hear and we see. And it's very hard, especially if it's your family and your friends that you're having to have these conversations with. One student said that she basically almost had to disown a family member. But again, once she did that, she also realized that she gained so many more people that she could support and they could support her. And again, with time, that family member did come back around. They could have those conversations. So again, just make sure you're giving time. You're also giving grace. If you don't think that you can have that conversation, you can always give them the book, right? So now that you've read the book, give them the book, right? Take notes and then say, hey, you know what? 6 months later or 5 weeks, whatever it may be, let's come back and have a conversation about the book. That's also another opportunity. And so again, just making sure that if you want to be an ally, you seek for ways to do that. You seek for ways to advocate, stand up, amplify those voices and those experiences. So thank you for sharing. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. So the next question that I have on my list here, it talks about racial bias. Has anyone ever experienced any bias in their life or discrimination? I see a couple hands. Would anyone like to share? Because I think another part about the awareness part is people being able to share and being comfortable to share and share their experiences. Okay, yes.
Yes, as an attorney at AFLAC, everyone, we have a very good culture. But prior to getting to AFLAC, I was an associate at a large law firm in Atlanta. And there's already a stigma that you're not smart enough when you're coming as a woman of color, and that you're young, so you're not prone to making the right decision because you're a millennial. So that made my experience very difficult being in a large law firm, being very smart, having attended Spelman, having done extremely well at Mercer Law, that you're going in with all of these stigmas. And you have to work harder. And it's not fun having that stigma, knowing that you have to work harder because you do have the burden of being the Black person in the room and sometimes the only person. So you have to have a network. I'm still friends with a lot of my friends from law school. I'm still friends with my Spelman sisters, my sorority sisters, but it is something that you learn that it's taught at a very early age, that racism, institutionalized racism, systemic racism, people aren't born like that. They're taught it. So you have the opportunity to change that. And when you have these difficult conversations, and thank you all for your courage and sharing, because it's hard, even being a lawyer at a great company now, having experienced that for 6 years, being at law firms, thinking that you're not smart enough, you're not good enough. And then when you get into a role like an in-house counsel where you hire them, you can laugh because they want my business and I won't give it to them because I remember that. So the track record that you're doing now, combating racism, social injustices, you have the platform now to make that change so that when you do become the lawyer from Mercer Law, that you're being a good representative and that you're making good trouble like Congressman Lewis would want you to, but you're also challenging for those who are saying, well, how do you change people? You can't change people, you can challenge them.
Yes.
So when you offer these new ideas that you're now seeking out from attending forums like this, challenge people. But don't get offended if you can't change them, because if you can't change them, we'll just bring forth your experiences so that you may can help other people.
I just feel like I need some snaps. I used to teach elementary school, like some snaps. Okay. I think someone else raised their hand. I couldn't. Okay.
What's your name?
Rhiannon.
All right. I kind of want to respond to what you said because I thought it was really interesting. So, I remember I was in 5th grade and I was at recess, and you know, every 5th grade boy would just want to play football, and we all played football at recess until 5th grade, where all the white boys who played football with all the other students, they just stopped playing with the Black boys, except me. I kept playing football with them until one day I walked over and I asked, like, hey guys, like, why do y'all want to come over and play football like we've always done? And I got told, if you want to go hang out with those blanks, go ahead. And I got put in a position where I was choose my friends, the white students who I'd always been friends with, or to play and do what I wanted to do was play football. And for about another week, I kept playing, and then I felt like I was being excluded, so I started to just go and talk with my friends. And I thought about a week ago, I was like, what led me to have some of the biases I had growing up as a kid? And I think that was probably the first time that I had that. And so it's absolutely something, like you said, this put on people at a young age, and they need to be challenged. I wasn't actually challenged until my first year of undergrad. I joined a student organization, and they matched up with a sponsor. And my sponsor was a Black gay man. And he, when I first met with him, he was shaking. He asked me, he was like, is it okay? Because I had a thick Southern accent. I'm from like deep South Georgia. And I was like, why wouldn't it be? And he was like, well, I just kind of got this vibe from you out of it. And since then, I have conversations with him to this day about ways to check my privilege. Most recent one was whenever the protests were happening over George Floyd's death in Atlanta, and I wanted to go and witness it just to see what a protest was like. And he was like, I want you to think about your privilege in that situation, that you had the luxury to go and just watch a protest, while this is something that people are doing to literally fight for their lives. That's why they're doing it. So I guess like the point of it is challenge yourself. I totally agree with that. Like engage in a conversation that, although may make you uncomfortable, you may grow like drastically through those conversations. And whenever you see instances of racism in children, just be a mentor and try to snuff that out as soon as you can. So I thought that was a really good point that you said.
And I'm gonna just piggyback off of that too. I think that's really important. I don't know if y'all remember the viral meme, like right after COVID, there was two little boys and they hadn't seen each other for forever. And they like ran up and hugged, right? And so I think that's very important that we point that out, that these biases, these stereotypes, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, all these isms, they're learned and you're conditioned to believe that way. You're conditioned to think that way. So if you're conditioned, guess what you can do? You can uncondition yourself. You can challenge yourself. And thank you for sharing your story about your encounter experience and even your privilege, because that is a point of privilege and having the luxury to not even have this conversation, to not even have to want to read the book and still sit in your privilege and benefit from sometimes these fields of systemic racism. So thank you for sharing that. I think that was very poignant and very powerful. And then thank you for calling out your friends. That had to be hard. That had to be hard, even at such a young age, because again, what do you think the reaction would have been? What could have been with them? What could have been a negative reaction from them? Do you think?
Well, you know, the thing is I didn't really call them out.
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I kept playing with my black friends for about a week, and then I just kind of succumbed to the peer pressure of wanting to be with my friends who I've been friends with my whole life. They were like family friends. Our parents were all close. And I mean, I transferred the next year to an all-white school. Okay. And then that just kind of took off. I never really got, like I said, I never really think I had another chance to address the biases that I started then until I got to college. Something I'm not proud of, but since then I've talked to a couple of them about that. They don't remember it, but yeah. So. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood that first part. But again, you know, you did say you did come back to the story and you did address that with them at a later date. Thank you.
Yeah,
a Zoom question. Okay.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Josh. Welcome.
Hi, I just wanted to tell my experience about a pretty recent experience with experiencing bias. So I went to, before coming to Mercer Law, I went to a PWI in Florida. It was a private school, and it was cool and everything. But they had this security team, and I'm sure Black students have probably had run-ins with campus security. I don't know anything about MERPO. That's what everyone, that's the abbreviation everyone uses. I haven't had any experiences with them, but but at my last school, I was being targeted as recently as earlier this year by one of the security officers. They would always be making up reasons to be coming to my apartment, talking about fire alarms going off, even though I'd be there the whole night. So obviously, if anyone would know about a fire alarm going off, it'd be me. It's just general stuff like that. Whenever they'd show up, because I lived with two other people, they would roll up and they would only search my room if they were looking, if they had suspicion that there was any contraband, stuff like that. And I was pretty involved on campus. Like I was a manager at the school's recreational center. So I interacted with security a lot, like the day shift people, when it came to locking up and closing up the gym. So one of them approached me when I was on my way to class one day, and he straight up said to me, he's like, "Hey, like you have like someone, like you're being targeted. Like they're talking about you. Like it's not just a thing where they like suspect that you're doing something wrong. Like these guys don't like you." And that really ticked me off. And luckily, like I hate to say luckily, we had to leave campus and everything because of COVID. Like that was terrible. But I think back, I was like, I don't even know like how things would have escalated if that was going to keep happening, because it was getting pretty ugly. Like once I knew that the targeting was like confirmed, I definitely acted a certain way whenever he tried to come into my place. So it was just really frustrating. And hearing the last story about racism in schools and how kids are so conditioned to either not say anything about it or participate in it when their friends are doing it. I'd say that's my roommates, like they would see it every time when security would roll up, and they didn't really pop in or anything. Am I frozen? Oh, okay. And they wouldn't really like speak up or anything until afterwards. They tell me like how screwed up it was.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you know how screwed up it was, but you didn't say anything when they were going through my trash at 2 a.m, like stuff like that. And that's something that I think a lot of people need to think about when if they're roommates with someone of a different race or background, that they need, that if they're going to be an ally, it's got to be like in real time.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, Josh. I think, like you said, it has to be in real time. Like in that moment, had they stood up for you and start asking questions, I think people would then have to explain themselves, and then the truth would have came out that they probably wouldn't admit it right then. I'm targeting Josh, but again, they probably been less likely to persist in that type of behavior because other people were now noticing it. Yeah. So again, be an ally in real time. Those are Josh's words. Ally in real time. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on to the next question?
Just quickly on racial bias, I can see how it can be really easy to sort of have like racial bias and both negative stereotypes. Because even myself, going through high school, which was predominantly white, I even held like sort of negative stereotypes of like Black people myself, and that wouldn't really change until I went to Morehouse, and when I was just pretty much immersed in a Black environment, and just became more comfortable and just learned more about Black history in America and Africa. And so I can see how having sort of racial bias and negative stereotypes can just be the normal thing, but you really do have to sort of challenge yourself and put yourself in a very uncomfortable situation and just grow in that.
Yeah. And so I like how my book fell open to this page. It says, people of color, as well as whites, develop these different categories. Even a member of a stereotype group may even internalize the stereotypical categories about his or her own group to some degree. In fact, this process so frequently happens that it has a name. So what you just talked about is internalized oppression. And so that's on page 86. And it says, and then Dr. Tatum goes on to talk about some of the consequences of that and even internalized oppression, when you start to even believe the own stereotypes that people have told you about yourself and your identity. Okay.
I think we have 2 more.
2 more on the Zoom. Zoom is hot. Okay. Wesley. Oh, you're muted, Wesley. 2020 rule.
All right, my bad. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was just gonna jump in on the examples of discrimination. So I am biracial. My dad's Black, my mom's white. So I've grown up in this weird space, right, where I've often not been Black enough to hang out with the Black kids or white enough to hang out with the white kids. In college, I had a guy tell me one time, you know, Wesley, you're white enough that I would let my daughter date you, but Black enough to keep it interesting. And I was like,
wow.
Oh, okay. And so, but in the moment, it's kind of one of those things. And the reason why, like, I wanted to bring up this story and another one is, in the moment, like, I kind of just like rolled with it, and it didn't hit me until like weeks later. And I was like, man, he really said that. And then, you know, on the flip side of that, I was thinking about pledging a fraternity. I won't name the fraternity.
Okay.
And
don't name it.
I got picked up after an event, and somebody that I consider close to me, he was like, he was a Black guy, and he was like, Wesley, I just need to tell you, if you're gonna be in our frat, you need to stop dating white girls. You have way too many white friends, and you need to focus on really being a part of the community. And that was something that was hard for me And it ended up resulting in me like running from the Black community and always feeling like I wasn't Black enough to exist in that space. And Mercer has done a lot for me with that, especially my fellow BLSA members have been welcoming. Because from the first day I was like, hey, how are we colorist here in BLSA? Like, because I'm very light skinned. My point in bringing all that up was just that we're talking about microaggressions and all these things that can happen, but like the effects that those things have may not be right immediate in that moment. And I'm sure that kid that said that, both of those guys, I'm sure they've never had a second thought about it. I've never brought it back up to them. But it's something that will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Thank you, Wesley, for sharing that story. I think it's very interesting that the way they put it, like you're Black enough to keep it interesting, but you're white enough to date my daughter. You know, that really it really speaks to how they viewed you as an individual, right? And so again, I think it's also important to acknowledge, like you said, that these things sometimes don't have an immediate impact, but they have a long-lasting impact. And a lot of things with microaggressions, micro assaults, micro invalidations, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, because you're constantly reliving that story, you're constantly reliving that narrative. And I don't want to speak for Wesley, but again, that thought probably replay over and over and over in the back of his head consistently, because when he was with his Black friends, oh, you're not Black enough, Wesley. When you were probably with your white friends, oh, you're too Black, Wesley, slow down. You know, so again, you probably had to
Big
kind
facts.
of, they said what now?
Big facts.
Big facts. So speaking truth. But again, I think like even with Dr. Tatum, when she talks about on page 299 in chapter 9, she even speaks more to the identity development in multiracial families. There's a lot of individuals that subscribe to more than just one identity. Angela Ray talks about not just being a monolith. So I think it's important that you kind of go back and review chapter 9 and see what it is like for someone like Wesley, who may identify as having multiracial identities. I think that's very important conversation to even have too. When we talk about this conversation about race and racism and race being a social construct, right? And then also the lasting impacts of, post-traumatic syndrome and even racial trauma, because again, that can impact you socially, emotionally, physiologically. Some people have even talked about having panic attacks, having suicidal thoughts. So again, these things are very, very, like you said, I think someone mentioned here, it's almost like a fight for your life, because you're having to constantly relive this narrative, even the stereotype. And like you said too, it becomes a form sometimes of internalized oppression. So I think it's very important that we have these conversations. We do a lot with self-reflection and even so with self-care to take care of ourselves. I think that's very important. Disconnect, I think Angela talked a little bit about being able to disconnect and reconnect and have a circle that's going to support you and see and celebrate color. Like you said, you came in the first day, you're not colorist, right? And you celebrate those conversations and celebrate color and make sure we expand upon diversity and we seek out inclusion. Okay? Do we have another question?
Yeah, we have 2 more actually.
Thank you, Wesley. It's Allison.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
I was just going to speak to how, I grew up in Gwinnett County, which is outside of Atlanta. It's very, very diverse. So all throughout school, we had everybody. And even when I went to college and I would be like, oh, my friend is Bosnian, I would meet people that are like, a Bosnian and stuff. But my experience really came from throughout the end of high school and through my early years in college. I had a Black boyfriend, and when we started dating, he was at Clark Atlanta, and he loved being there and everything. But then we both when I graduated high school, we moved down the road to Georgia College and State University, and that is not very diverse. At least 10 years ago, it definitely wasn't. I'm not sure what their statistics are now. Their pride was that they had 100 Black men and 70 Black women out of 10,000 students, which is nothing. And my RA at the time, it still makes me mad, I'm sorry. My RA at the time went to high school with my boyfriend and still called the cops on him one day for coming to my dorm because he didn't think that it was right for me to have a Black boyfriend in college. Even though he knew that we'd been together for years, he knew him personally from high school. And that's when I was like, wow, you actually grew up in a Gwinnett County school, completely diverse, and you have this mindset and you're in charge of students and our well-being in the residence hall.
Yeah.
And it still bothers me 10 years later because I just don't understand how you can be that close-minded. Like, I was always raised, I have a mother that's always praised diversity, so I appreciate these conversations. And I felt like Gwinnett County was I feel like our generation actually is very lucky to have these conversations and be open together, and to be like shut down by some authority at the school. It was very shocking.
Thank you, Allison. I think it's important that we talk about the criminalization of people of color. I think that's a very important part of the conversation. We don't only got like 8 minutes, so I can't go into it tonight, but I think it's important to point out what she's talking about, that criminalization of an individual. And you can see why laws such as, like, they're trying to enact, I think it's Karen's law, but that's like a slang term for it. But basically when you falsify a report, right? Like we saw with the man that was bird watching, and she automatically knew that if she called the police and he was a Black man in Central City Park, then that was going to become a completely different situation. I think that's what even 10 years ago, what your RA was about to do, right? Because he knew the potential repercussions of him calling on that person, that individuals. All right. This Zoom, I tell you, man. Y'all should have been in person. Okay. Is it Joyner? Okay. Okay, you're muted. No, stop. Start over. You're muted. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Anth Joyner. I'm actually a third year here in Atlanta, working on my master's in arts and teaching. And I wanted to share this because when you were talking about the internalized oppression, I just had to share this about when I was substituting in Hall County. Everyone was telling me, don't go up there. But I had the most beautiful experiences until I was in a long-term sub position at this particular school. And my first day at the lunch table, all of the other teachers were not like me. And they literally got up when I sat down. These are teachers. Moved to the other table, picked up that table, and slid it down. Yes.
Oh.
So this book, I had to listen to what you all were talking about, because that really threw me for a loop. As a person from West Point, Mississippi, who's been in Atlanta for about 10 years, I have experienced some things that I've never experienced in Mississippi. I've experienced some things that has just been unreal. As the gentleman Wesley was talking about, I have a beautiful 18-year-old daughter who's beautiful, dark skin, and just from my own people, some of the comments, like, is that really your mom, Lizzie? And I was just like, never questioned like that at home. So I've experienced intra-racism and I've experienced inter-racism. It's been a challenge being here. It has been something that I'm so thankful for all of these talks. I wish I could have been involved in more of them and read all of the books and watched all the movies, but I just applaud you all for doing this. And now I know not to sit quiet and try to keep peace. And everyone keeps talking about good trouble.
Good trouble.
That is absolutely necessary when something like that happens to speak upon it.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the position no longer matters. Getting a good recommendation from the principal no longer matters. You have to stop the cycle by speaking up. And I had to learn that, going through what I went through, which was basically, I was like, I can't deal with it. And I just left and I was silent. But I know now that other people have spoken up, because there were 2 teachers. I was so amazed. There were 2 white teachers that actually spoke up on my behalf. and they even left the school. So you would think that it wouldn't affect a teacher, but it did. It did. So I thank you all for this. I hope that everyone understands the proper protocol for addressing issues like that in the professional world. And that's basically what I wanted to say. And thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Joyner. You led me into a couple things for people to follow up with. So she talks a little bit about colorism. I think someone else mentioned that in the room too. Structurism is also a part of that, like facial structures. I want you to also take a look at texturism when it comes to hair and hair discrimination, and even the Crown Act, which is a law that's on the books now that fight hair discrimination. And then also, if you want a really cool movie to watch, it's like from 1956, The Imitation of Life. How many people have seen it? Okay, there we go. But it's a really great movie. It's in black and white. Ooh, shocker. It's in black and white, but it talks a lot about colorism, and especially within people of color, we come in all different shades and varieties. And so again, that's a really big thing, even within people of color in our community, how we even treat each other, because again, there's this assimilation to whiteness, or this proximity to whiteness, or adjacent to whiteness, where you may be treated differently because of the texture of your hair, the facial structure features that you have. And again, we can see that can be one of those remnants left over from slavery. I won't get into that conversation because it takes a long time to go down that road. But again, if you do have a chance to watch The Imitation of Life, a last thing I want to talk to you about too is reporting. So if you do experience an incident of bias, discrimination, harassment, those are things that we need to report, okay? Especially as future attorneys, we need to understand that reporting process. Please make sure that you reach out to proper administration. I know the deans and assistant deans are in the room to report those acts, because again, that is a part of the process. That is a part of challenging, like we said, challenging the narrative, changing the narrative, making sure that this society and this law school is more inclusive each and every day. So again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your comments. I thank you for sharing your talents and gifts with us tonight. If Angela was here, I'd give her another round of applause, but I'm pretty sure she's dealing with Smokey. So, and I know it's late because my dog Brownie didn't probably tore up my bathroom. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here. It's 8 o'clock.